In 1996, I let go of my son's hand for less than 5 seconds. That was all it took. One moment we were standing by the pretzel stand in the middle of a bustling mall, the next he was gone. No scream, no cry, no sound at all. Just a single orange shoelace dragging across the floor where he'd been. I still see it when I close my eyes. The lace. The silence. The space where he should have been. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from down in the comments and tap like and subscribe if stories like this ever brushed past your own life. Every click helps pull another forgotten name back into the light. My name is Linda Ashford. I was 39 that year. I lived in the Heights just north of downtown Houston. Richard and I had been married nearly 20 years by then. He was a civil engineer with a quiet smile and a firm handshake. Jake was our only child at the time. 5 years old, always sticky with lemonade, always loud when he wasn't supposed to be, always quiet when you needed to hear him. He had this habit of tapping his shark tooth necklace 3 times when things got too loud, 1, 2, 3, like a secret code only he understood. We got it from one of those vending machines in the front of a grocery store, and it meant the world to him. Same with his sneakers, 1 red lace, 1 bright orange. That was my idea, so I could spot him in a crowd. It was a Saturday early summer, already hot, even inside the mall. We weren't in a rush that day. Jake had behaved all week, so I told him he could pick the arcade or a pretzel. He chose the pretzel even though I saw the way he looked at the skee-ball machines downstairs. I was proud of him for that. We stood by the railing on the 2nd floor for a minute. He leaned over to watch the carousel spin below us, mirrors throwing our reflections back in chopped-up pieces. A janitor's cart squeaked past. Somewhere an organ chirped. I asked him again, pretzel or arcade? He looked at the lights, then back at me and said, pretzel. I remember thinking he's learning. He's learning how to breathe through it. At the counter, I reached into my purse for a few coins. I let go of his hand. That was all. The coins slipped from my fingers, hit the tray. I turned back and Jake wasn't there. I didn't panic right away, not in the way you'd expect. I said his name soft at first, Jake. Then again, Jake. I turned left, then right. The world around me kept moving. A man in a navy jacket stepped out from an employee-only hallway, didn't make eye contact. I remember the way he angled his face like he didn't want to be seen. But I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking anything. I called his name louder. People started looking. The girl behind the counter asked if something was wrong. I didn't answer. I was scanning for red, for orange, for a shark tooth, for that tapping sound he made when he was nervous. There was nothing. Just a balloon bumping against the skylight, just the smell of cinnamon, just a space where my son should have been. Security wrote it down as a report. Last seen level 2, 2:36 p.m. They asked what he was wearing. I told them. They asked if he knew a phone number. I said he did. I told them about the scar on his arm from the slide at the park. They played back the tapes, but the angles were all wrong, set up to catch shoplifters, not save children. One frame had him by the railing, the next just legs, the third just me mouth open mid-scream. By 4:00, the mall was shutting down. Metal gates rolled. People whispered. Police cars lit up the parking lot. But I already knew what they were going to say. By sunset, we were home, only we weren't. Not really. Not anymore. That night, Richard pulled out the maps. He circled every stairwell, every service hallway, every exit like he was drawing bruises. And I sat in Jake's room, holding that spare orange shoelace, praying it meant something. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last day my son would ever be 5 years old. And something about that mall, about what happened in those 5 seconds, never felt right. Not then. Not now. And by the time we got the first message, it had already been 28 years. I didn't sleep the night Jake disappeared. I don't think I even closed my eyes. The hours stretched out like wet rope, slack and heavy, and I sat at the kitchen table holding the phone like it might ring if I squeezed it hard enough. Richard paced the hallway, marking up a copy of the mall's blueprint he'd gotten from a friend in city planning. He kept circling exits, emergency stairwells, service corridors, places a 5-year-old could wander or be taken without anyone noticing. The circles started to overlap. They looked like bruises. The mall shut down by early evening. They said they were cooperating fully and turned over the security footage without hesitation. But when the detective showed me the tapes, I knew we weren't going to find answers there. The cameras weren't aimed at where Jake had been. They were positioned to catch shoplifters, not protect children. In the clearest angle we had, Jake was visible for 3 seconds, standing near the railing, fiddling with his necklace. Then, in the next frame, he was gone. A smear of legs, a crowd. In the third frame, I was turning around, lips open mid-call. That was it. The rest was static and shadows. The officers who arrived that night were kind but clinical. They wrote everything down. My statement, Richard's timeline, the exact number of coins I had in my purse. They asked about Jake's behavior. Was he prone to wandering? Did he know not to talk to strangers? I told them about his necklace, his habit of tapping it when he got overwhelmed. I told them about the bright orange shoelace. I told them he wouldn't just leave. And I told them about the man, the one in the navy jacket. I couldn't give them a face, only what I remembered, the way he kept his eyes low, the way he angled away from me like he didn't want to be remembered. They took the detail down. They said they'd follow up on mall staff records. But I could see it in their faces. They were already thinking maybe Jake just slipped off, got scared, wandered too far. It happens, they said. Kids panic and hide. They hide in dressing rooms. They hide behind planters. They hide until the whole world turns upside down and no one knows where to look. But Jake didn't hide. I knew that the way I knew my own name. He was gone, and no one could explain how. That first week we stayed by the phone. We barely left the house except to post flyers. Jake's face was everywhere on bulletin boards, telephone poles, bus shelters. I stopped a woman at the grocery store because her son had the same sneakers. I apologized afterward. She just stared at me and pulled her child closer. Reporters came by. We said no to most of them, but eventually we agreed to one local news segment, just to get his face out there. I held up a flyer and tried not to cry. Richard read from a prepared statement. If you know anything, please come forward. Nothing came. Days blurred, then weeks, then months. Summer turned to fall. Jake's bedroom stayed the same. Every Sunday I dusted the bookshelf and refolded the blankets. I stopped washing his laundry because I was afraid I'd forget the smell. His backpack still hung by the door. Sometimes I'd unzip it and find a crumpled drawing or half a pack of crayons and just sit on the floor holding it like it was a life raft. The detective on the case, his name was Franklin, called every few weeks. Just to check in, just to say they were still working it. But it always felt like he was delivering condolences. I asked once if there was any chance Jake had been taken out of the mall through the employee-only corridors, the ones in the back near the service elevators. He said it was being looked into, but I could tell they weren't holding out much hope. After a while, he stopped calling. The case went cold, or maybe it had been cold the whole time and I just hadn't wanted to see it. When the holidays came, I couldn't bring myself to decorate. The neighbors dropped off cookies and cards and casseroles we didn't touch. Richard poured bourbon into his coffee and started sleeping in the den. I remember one night I found him holding the spare orange lace, just sitting there on the couch, staring at it like it might spell something if he looked long enough. I asked him what he was thinking. He didn't answer. He just handed it to me and went upstairs. Years passed. I don't know how many. Long enough that people stopped asking. Long enough that new neighbors moved in and didn't know we had once had a son. Aaron was born 3 years after Jake disappeared. A surprise. I was 42. The pregnancy wasn't planned, But in a way, it was the only thing that pulled me out of the house again. Holding her didn't take the pain away, but it changed the shape of it. Still, we never spoke about Jake around her, not in those early years. Not until she asked point blank who the boy was in the photo albums, the one with the cowlick and the gummy smile. I told her the truth slowly, carefully. She sat with it. She didn't ask again for a long time. But I saw the way she'd pause in front of his bedroom door, the one we never opened. I saw the way she'd touch the shark tooth pendant I'd kept in the drawer beside my bed, the match to the one Jake always wore. She looked at it like it held some kind of answer. In a way, I guess it did. It was around that time we started converting the attic, not because we needed the space, but because the boxes had started piling up. Old flyers, handwritten notes, the original missing persons report photocopied so many times the ink had faded. Richard labeled everything by year like we were curating a museum no one would ever visit. Erin called it the quiet room. I never corrected her. Life didn't return to normal. It just became a different kind of quiet. Quieter than anyone who hadn't lived it could understand. But underneath that quiet, something still pulsed. Some part of me refused to bury him. Not completely. I never stopped watching crowds, never stopped scanning parks or malls or schoolyards for a boy who might have grown tall and serious. I didn't know what he'd look like anymore, but I thought maybe I'd know. Maybe there'd be something, a feeling, a glance, something. I told myself I wasn't imagining it, and I told myself that even if I was, I had to keep going. I had to keep looking. Because mothers don't stop. They just get better at hiding the ache. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, I was folding laundry when I heard a sound I hadn't heard in years. Erin, now a young woman, let out a noise from the other room. Not a scream, not even a shout. Just a sharp inhale like her breath had caught on something. I walked in to find her staring at her phone. Her thumb was frozen above the screen. She looked pale. I asked her what it was. She turned the phone around. It was a TikTok video. Just a regular one. 2 people at a coffee shop, laughing, talking. But in the corner of the frame, blurry but unmistakable, a man reached for a drink and turned slightly. And on his arm, his right arm, was a scar I had kissed 1,000 times when he was small. A pale crescent. The same shape. The same spot. I couldn't speak. I took the phone and pressed pause. Erin whispered, "Mom, I think I found him." And in that moment, the quiet of 28 years cracked open like glass under pressure. Something had shifted. Something real. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew this much: we weren't finished. Not yet. At first, I didn't say anything. I just sat there staring at the paused frame on Erin's phone. The video wasn't focused on him. It wasn't even about him. Some young woman talking to a barista, both of them laughing about something I couldn't hear. But in the background, he turned just enough. It wasn't just the scar. It was the way he held his shoulders, the way his head tilted when someone else spoke. I knew that tilt. I'd seen it in grainy home videos, in birthday photos, in the way Jake used to listen so closely, his whole body leaned forward. Erin whispered again, "Mom." But I was already holding the phone tighter than I meant to frozen. I could feel Richard walk in behind me. I didn't look up. He stood over my shoulder and watched the screen. When the man lifted his coffee cup, the sleeve pulled back slightly. That scar. Pale and exact. Richard didn't say a word, just walked out of the room. Erin was already searching the comments. Most were about the people in the video jokes likes emojis, but a few stood out. One person wrote, "Who's the guy at the back table?" Another said, "He looks familiar." And then someone had written, "That scar. Does anyone else recognize that scar?" Erin grabbed a pen and started writing down usernames, locations, anything that looked remotely useful. I couldn't stop staring at the screen. It was blurry. It could have been anyone. That's what Richard said later, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed. "We can't do this to ourselves again," he told me. "Scars aren't fingerprints." But even he watched the clip 3 more times before walking away. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in Jake's old room, which had become the storage place for everything we couldn't throw away. I opened the drawer where I'd kept the twin necklace, his first one, the one we gave him after he lost the gumball prize. It was dull with age now, but still cool to the touch. I laid it across my palm and tapped it once, twice, 3 times. Erin came in sometime after midnight, sat down next to me without saying anything. She had her laptop open. She was scrolling through old posts, trying to see if the man from the video had ever appeared in anything else. After a while, she looked up and said, "What do we do if it really is him?" I didn't answer. I think part of me was still afraid to say his name out loud. The next morning, she did what I couldn't bring myself to do. She made a TikTok account, just a blank profile with no photo, and she left a comment on the original video. "Does anyone know the man in the background? Please contact me." I didn't think anything would come of it. Most of those posts get buried in noise. But by that afternoon, Erin's inbox was full. Most of it was useless people making jokes, people pretending they were him, people being cruel just because they could. But one message stood out. "I know who he is," it read. "He works at a garage just outside Austin. People call him David." Erin showed it to me with shaking hands. I took a screenshot and printed it out. I circled the name. I read it over and over. David. It didn't sound like Jake, but maybe that was the point. A few days later, Erin booked us a motel outside Austin. She packed a manila folder with everything she thought we'd need. Old photos, the flyer with his scar circled in red ink, and the shark tooth pendant. She printed out directions to the garage mentioned in the message. Richard was quiet the whole time. He didn't argue, but he didn't help us pack either. When we got in the car, he sat in the back seat. I think it was the only way he could come with us and still keep some distance. The drive was long and quiet. I kept the pendant in my lap the entire way. Every time we passed a road sign, I found myself counting 3 letters, 3 syllables, 3 lines on the shoulder. I didn't know why, but it helped. When we got to the motel, the woman at the front desk gave us a room that smelled like coffee grounds and carpet cleaner. I couldn't sit still. I walked circles around the parking lot. Erin stayed inside, refreshing her phone every few seconds. Then just before sunset, she spotted another video. Different angle, different account, but the same man. Sitting at a booth in the background of a diner, same shirt, same necklace, same scar. She whispered, "Mom, he's real." I told her to stay put and walked outside. I don't know how long I stood there. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe a sign. Maybe a voice. What I got was silence, thick and still. The next morning, we went to the diner. Erin sat by the window, phone in hand. We didn't talk much. We just waited. And then he walked in, not with confidence. More like someone who'd spent his life watching for something to go wrong. He had grease under his nails, work shirt, quiet hands. He didn't look around, just sat down, ordered coffee, and kept to himself. Erin lifted her phone and started recording, not in a flashy way, just a slow zoom. Not on his face, but on his arm. The scar. She sent it to me without a word. I watched it from across the table. When I looked up, he was staring back. Just for a second. Our eyes met. And in that 1 second, something passed between us. I don't know what it was. Recognition, maybe. Or maybe just a flicker of something lost long ago. He looked away too fast. Got up. Left before finishing his drink. Erin's hands were shaking. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. In the morning, Richard sat on the edge of the bed and said, "If we push too hard, we might lose him again." I nodded. But the truth was, we'd never really had the chance to hold him. That afternoon, I wrote a note. Short, careful, just a few lines. If you are Jacob Ashford, we are your family. We never stopped searching. Please meet us. Your mother, Linda. I folded it and slipped it under the garage door at dawn. I didn't know if he'd read it. I didn't know if he'd tear it up. But I had to try. Later that day, when we drove by the shop, I looked at the garbage bin behind the building. I don't know why, but something told me to. And there it was, a piece of torn paper fluttering just beneath the lid, the top corner. My handwriting, still folded just enough to see the crease. Someone had read it. That was enough. For now. I didn't expect anything after leaving the note. I told myself it was enough just to have written it. But that evening I sat by the motel window with the curtain half drawn, watching the entrance to the auto shop across the street like it might open at any second. It didn't. Just the occasional clatter of tools, the flicker of movement behind the glass. When the lights finally clicked off, I saw his silhouette move through the back lot toward a small staircase leading to the second floor. I stayed up an hour longer, listening to nothing in particular. Erin eventually fell asleep with her phone on her chest. Richard lay stiff under the blanket, eyes open, not speaking. In the morning, I checked the motel trash for the torn note. It wasn't there. Later that day, Erin told me someone had posted a new clip of him online, just a few seconds blurry again. Same coffee shop. He was quieter in this one. Tired. You could see it in the way he turned his head, like he felt something following him. A waitress tried to speak to him. He nodded but didn't answer. He tapped his fingers on the tabletop 3 times and then pulled his hand away like he didn't know why he'd done it. Erin showed me that part on a loop. I watched it until the image felt like it was burning into my eyes. It was the rhythm, the way he tapped, not frantic, not absent-minded. A muscle-deep memory. 1, 2, 3. By the time we got back to the garage, there was a different car out front. Not a customer's. Just parked along the curb with the engine off. Windows tinted. I saw a shape behind the wheel. Could have been a man, maybe not. It didn't move. Not when we walked by. Not even when Erin glanced back over her shoulder. We didn't say anything about it. We just kept walking. Inside the shop, he was working under the hood of a truck. Didn't look up. Someone else handed him a socket wrench and pointed toward the exhaust. When we passed again 2 hours later, the same car was still there. This time it idled. Then it pulled away as we approached. No license plate on the front. Just a flicker of tail lights. That night, David, if that was his name, found another note. This one wasn't from us. Erin caught it secondhand through the online chatter. Someone who worked in the shop mentioned it. 4 words written in shaky pen. We know who you are. It wasn't signed. He didn't show anyone. Just crumpled it, stuck it in his pocket, and kept working. But his pace changed. His shoulders changed. He moved like someone being watched. Erin said maybe we should wait, that if we came on too strong we might scare him off. But I felt the opposite. I felt like if we didn't act soon, someone else might reach him first, and I wasn't sure they meant well. The next morning, I opened the motel drawer where I'd kept the pendant. I laid it on the edge of the table and stared at it. Across from me, Erin clicked through articles on her laptop. One page showed missing children reunited with their families after decades. Another had a list of unsolved abduction cases from the 90s. I saw a name I recognized. Not from Jake's case, but from another mother I'd spoken to years ago in a church basement during a support group. Her son was never found either. At noon, I finally called someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 decades. His name was Detective Sam Ross. He was one of the original investigators on Jake's disappearance. He'd retired early around the time the case went cold. I didn't think he'd remember me. but he did. His voice on the other end was slow and careful. When I told him what we'd found, he went quiet, not disbelieving, just still. I asked if he'd be willing to meet. He said yes, said he still lived out near Bastrop. We met him at a small diner off the highway. He was older now, with deep lines under his eyes and a limp I didn't remember. Aaron handed him the printout of the photo. The one from the diner clip. Ross studied it. Didn't speak for a long time. Then he set it down and leaned forward. "I always had doubts," he said, "even back then. Security footage cutting out at the exact minute your son disappeared. Witnesses contradicting each other. Management downplaying staff turnover. But there was too much pressure on the department. Too many politics. We were told to keep it simple. Treat it like a runaway or a custodial snatch." He shook his head. Didn't sit right. Aaron asked the question we'd both been circling. "If that man is my brother, will a DNA test prove it?" Ross nodded slowly. "Yeah, if you can get him to take one." That was the hardest part. You can't force someone, not without a court order. And we didn't even have proof of identity yet, just resemblance memory instinct. The next day, I drove by the garage alone. Aaron stayed back. I didn't get out. I just parked across the street and watched. Around sunset, I saw him step out to smoke. He leaned against the side wall, head down, cigarette glowing at the tip. Then he reached under his collar and pulled something out. It was the necklace. The shark tooth. Not identical, but aged. Worn down to the shape of a memory. He tapped it once. Then again. Then a third time. I don't know what made me do it, but I stepped out of the car. I didn't approach, just stood across the street with my hands at my sides. I whispered his name. Jake. Not loud. Not a cry. Just enough to carry. And somehow... He looked up. His eyes scanned unfocused at first. Then they landed on me. We stared at each other for a long time. He didn't move. He didn't run. He just stared. I took one step forward. That's all. And then he turned, walked back inside, and shut the door. I stood there until the sky darkened. Then I got back in the car and drove away, clutching the pendant in my hand. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew this: he'd heard me. He'd heard his name, and that meant something had shifted, even if just a little. The day after he looked at me, really looked at me, I stayed away. We all did. No garage, no diner, no coffee shop. Aaron spent the morning cross-referencing names from the TikTok comments with anyone we could find in that part of Austin. People who might have mentioned the shop, the diner, anything. I sat with a photo in my hands. Jake at 5, wearing his crooked smile and those ridiculous sneakers, one red lace, one orange. I stared at it so long I stopped seeing his face. Just shape and color and the curl of the laces. By early afternoon, Aaron got a response from someone who said they knew him. Not well, just through a friend who had brought a car to that shop once. Said he was quiet, kept to himself. Always wore the same necklace. Always paid in cash when he went out. She asked if they knew his real name. They said everyone called him David, but no one knew much else. The same person sent a screen grab of a job board listing from 3 years back. Help wanted, part-time mechanic small garage, South Lamar. Ask for David. That was the first time we saw the name in print. A few hours later, Aaron left the room and came back holding a small box. No label, just a note taped to the top that read, "He needs proof." Inside was a home DNA test kit swab. Instructions: return envelope. No return address. I don't know who sent it. Still don't. But it was exactly what we needed. Richard said we shouldn't push it, not directly. That if it got back to him the wrong way, it might look like a trap. But I couldn't sit still anymore. I printed out the flyer again, the original one with the hotline number and the scar circled in red. Then I folded the photo of Jake so just the eyes showed. I took the pendant from the drawer and held it for a long time. Then I walked to the garage alone and asked for David. The younger guy behind the counter said he'd gone out for a bit. I left the envelope anyway. Didn't include a note this time, just the kit, the flyer, and the photograph. I walked back to the motel through the early evening haze, not quite sure if I'd done the right thing. The next morning, Erin checked the tracking number. Nothing had been sent. She checked again the day after that. Still nothing. Then, on the third morning, she sat up straight at the breakfast table. The envelope had been dropped at a post office near South Lamar just before closing the night before. That meant he'd seen it, touched it, chose to send it. None of us said a word. We just sat there, each of us quietly calculating what it would mean if the results came back the way we thought they might, and what it would mean if they didn't. The wait stretched out longer than I thought it would. 5 days, then 6. On the 7th day, Erin got an email. She didn't open it right away. She stared at the subject line for a long time, like reading it might change the contents. Then she clicked. I watched her face. I could tell before she spoke. Her hand came up to her mouth. She nodded. The results were in. Probability of maternity, 99.99%. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just stood up and walked to the sink and stared out at the motel parking lot like something might suddenly appear there. Richard sat down hard in the chair next to me. He didn't say anything either. Just kept repeating one thing under his breath. He's alive. He's alive. But across town, David, or Jake if he knew it yet, hadn't seen the results. We hadn't sent them. We weren't sure how. Erin said maybe we give it time, let him come to us. Richard wasn't so sure. He said if this had been hanging over your life for that long, you'd want the truth as soon as you could get it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if he saw it all at once, he might retreat again. Disappear. So we waited. For 3 more days we did nothing. We didn't go near the shop. We didn't post online. We let the quiet settle around us again. And then, one night, headlights swept across the wall of our room. A car pulled into the lot, slowed, parked. A man stepped out. Not David. Older in a jacket that didn't quite fit, holding something in his hand. He walked right up to our door and knocked once. I opened it. He held out a newspaper clipping, faded, wrinkled at the edges. It was the one with Jake's photo and the headline from 1996. Daniel Carter, he said. It's time we talked. I blinked. He looked past me toward Richard, who had already stood up. Detective Ross, he said. I worked your case. The DNA confirms it. It's him. We brought him inside. Sat at the small round table near the window. Erin sat on the edge of the bed, knees pulled up. Ross looked tired. Not just old, but worn in a way that looked permanent. He hasn't seen the results yet, I told him. We weren't sure I showed him, Ross said quietly. Tonight. I looked at him. He nodded. I thought he should hear it from someone who was there from the start, someone who remembers what was taken from him. He didn't go into details, just said that David had looked at the paper, then the photo, then the numbers, and then sat down without saying a word. He didn't argue, Ross said. He just kept touching the pendant around his neck like he was trying to remember what it meant. That night none of us slept. We didn't know what came next. We only knew the silence was different now, not empty, just waiting. In the morning, a woman stopped by the garage with a flat tire. Her name was Mrs. Alvarez. Said she recognized David from a flyer she'd seen in a church bulletin years ago. Told him gently. Didn't push. Just left a folded newspaper article on the counter and drove away. Someone else had recognized him. Someone else had remembered. And slowly, the picture was starting to sharpen, not just for us, but for him. I don't know when the next door will open. But I do know this: the more the world sees him, the more truth comes forward. And whether he's ready or not, the truth is moving. Toward him. Toward us. and none of us can stop it now. The day Ross showed David the results, I didn't know where he went afterward. He didn't come to the motel, didn't answer the number Ross had given him, didn't show up at the diner or the garage. Erin sat by the window most of that night, legs pulled up, phone untouched beside her. Richard kept checking the parking lot like he expected headlights to sweep across it at any second. They didn't. I sat at the foot of the bed with the pendant in my hand, turning it over with my thumb. I'd worn down one of the edges from years of doing that back when it felt like the only thing in the house that still held a pulse. I didn't sleep, not really. Just drifted in and out of half-thoughts until morning. When we checked the garage the next day, it was closed. Not locked up, just still. The lights were off. The bay doors rolled halfway down. Someone had left a rag draped over the fender of a car that looked like it hadn't moved in weeks. There was no sign of David. Ross said to give it time, but I felt it in my gut he hadn't run. He'd retreated. Those are different things. That afternoon, Erin got a call from someone she hadn't expected to hear from, a man named Philip Miller. The name meant nothing at first until she repeated it out loud, and then it clicked. It was the name David had given to the garage when he first applied. On paper. He'd listed it as an emergency contact. Miller. We knew then. Whoever had raised him, whoever had taken the place of us, this was them. Ross made the call. I sat beside him on the edge of a bench near the park while he spoke quietly, slowly. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. We'd like to meet. Talk. It's not a criminal investigation, not yet. That word stuck with me. Yet. The Millers agreed. I don't know why. Maybe they were tired too, or maybe they thought they still had some version of him to protect. We drove out that evening, Ross in one car, us in another. It was a modest ranch-style house with a crooked mailbox and a wind chime on the porch, the kind of place you wouldn't look at twice. David was already there, sitting in a folding chair by the garage with his hands locked together. He didn't look at us when we pulled up, just stared at the concrete like something had come loose under it. Ross went first, walked up the steps and knocked. A woman opened the door, older, silver hair pulled back in a low knot. She wore a navy sweater with one sleeve cuffed and the other stretched past her wrist. She looked past Ross and saw David. Then she saw us. Her face didn't change. She opened the door wider and let Ross in. We followed. The inside of the house was neat, too neat. The kind of tidy that doesn't come from order but from fear of being asked questions. The man, Philip, was already seated at the kitchen table. His hands were trembling a little, resting on top of a manila folder like it had been waiting for years to be opened. The woman sat across from him. Ross didn't bother with introductions. He just set a photo on the table. Jake, age 5, that same crooked grin. You knew, Ross said. Not a question. The woman opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The man cleared his throat. We didn't take him, he said. We were told he had no one. That he needed a home. That it was legal. We paid an adoption fee, nothing unusual. Ross didn't respond. He just opened his own folder and slid a second document across the table. That's not what the records show. The man looked down. I couldn't see what was written, but whatever it was, it made his shoulders fall. The woman finally spoke. He was dropped off by someone who said they worked with placement, said there were no parents, that it was private, that if we wanted a child, this was how. She looked at David then. We didn't ask questions. Maybe we should have. But we loved him. We raised him. I don't know what I expected to feel in that moment. Rage, maybe. Or relief. But what I felt most was distance. Like I was watching a play through a thick sheet of glass and no one had remembered to write an ending. David stood up before anyone else spoke. You never asked where I came from, he said. His voice was flat tired. You just said I was yours. And that was enough. The man stood too, like he thought he was supposed to. "We gave you a home," he said. "You gave me a lie," David said. Then he walked out. I followed him, though I didn't try to stop him. I just stayed a few steps behind until we reached the sidewalk. He paused there. I saw his hands trembling. He pulled the pendant out from under his shirt and tapped it 3 times. I said nothing. The sky was turning that dusty pink color that only happens before summer storms. He stared out across the yard. "I remember a woman's voice," he said quietly, calling a name I didn't recognize, but it made my chest hurt. I waited. He didn't finish the thought. We got back to the motel just before it started to rain. Aaron met us in the lobby, eyes searching our faces for something, an answer maybe. I just shook my head. We sat that night without the TV on. Just the soft hum of the air conditioner and the wind slipping through the gaps in the window seal. David didn't come in, but I saw him across the street standing under a streetlight near the vending machine. He didn't move, just stood there with both hands in his pockets. I didn't wave. I didn't call his name. I just watched him like I used to watch the swing set at the park, quiet, steady, and not sure whether he'd come back. When the light turned off overhead, he stepped into the dark. I kept my eyes on the space where he'd been waiting for the next morning, knowing something had changed, not just in him, in all of us, and it was only beginning. The next morning, I found David sitting outside the motel on one of those plastic chairs that always lean a little too far back. His elbows were on his knees, his hands folded, the pendant visible against a soft gray t-shirt I hadn't seen him wear before. He didn't look at me when I stepped outside. He just said, "I don't remember everything, but some of it's coming through now." I sat next to him without asking. The parking lot was still sun rising slow over the edge of the roofline. "I remember a woman singing," he said, low, like a hum. It wasn't a song I knew, just sounds that made the air softer. He looked down at his hands, and a fall. I cut my arm on something. She held me so tight I thought I'd disappear into her chest. He pointed to the scar, faint but permanent. "This is where." I didn't speak, just let the silence stretch. After a while, he added, "I think her name was Linda." That was the first time he'd said my name out loud. Not Mom, not anything else, just Linda. But it settled something in my chest like a string that had finally stopped vibrating. That night, we had dinner together. All 4 of us. Chinese takeout, mostly quiet, nobody sure what to say. Erin told a story about 2nd grade and how she once got caught forging my signature on a permission slip. Richard chuckled for the first time in weeks. I watched David pick at his food. He listened closely, eyes sharp but tired. When Erin passed him the fortune cookies, he stared at his a long time before cracking it open. He didn't read it out loud, but I saw the slip of paper on the table. It said, "The truth always rises, sooner or later." We didn't talk about the Millers, not that night, not about what they'd said, not about how they got him. That would come later. For now it was just enough that he was there, that he'd come in from the dark. The next morning, Ross knocked on our door again. He carried a small folder in one hand and a look that told me whatever was inside wasn't over. He sat on the end of the bed and opened it. His name was Harold Keene, he said. Mall security, Houston Galleria, 1996. He disappeared 2 weeks after Jake did. No notice, no forwarding address. We thought he skipped town. David sat across from him, leaning forward, listening closely. Turns out, Ross continued, he changed his name. Moved west. Lived quiet. No record of employment after the year he vanished. But he was tied to at least 2 other incidents, kids who were reported missing from public places. Nothing ever stuck, and the families didn't have enough evidence to push further. Ross pulled out a photo, grainy black and white, a scan of an old ID badge. The face in it had thinned with time, but the jawline and eyes were the same. "We found him," Ross said. "Lives in a trailer outside Fort Worth under a false name. I don't think he's part of some massive ring anymore. He's old, unwell. But if anyone knows why you were taken, it's him." David stared at the photo. "He was the one who led me through the corridor," he said slowly. "I don't know how I know that, but I do." Ross asked if he'd be willing to come with him. Not for an interrogation, just a conversation. David agreed. No hesitation. We drove up the next day. Ross went in first. The trailer sat at the edge of a scrub lot, sun-warped siding windows fogged from the inside. The air smelled of motor oil and something spoiled. When Ross came back out, he said, "He'll talk, but not long. He's tired. He knows why we're here." David walked in alone, said he needed to. I stood by the car with the door half open, watching the trailer like it might breathe or collapse. 20 minutes passed. Then the door opened again. David stepped out slowly, face unreadable. Ross followed. He waited until David got into the car before coming over to me. He admitted it, Ross said. Said he'd watched you both knew you were distracted at the pretzel stand. Said he'd done it before. That he'd been paid to deliver the boy to someone waiting in the employee lot. I gripped the edge of the door. Did he say who? Ross shook his head. Only that it was always cash. No names, no receipts. And that the Millers weren't the first to try this. I didn't ask what that meant. I wasn't ready to hear the whole shape of it. The ride back was quiet. David sat with his hand resting on the window, watching trees pass like they might say something. That night he sat with Erin on the motel balcony. I stayed inside. I could hear them talking, voices low. She asked him if he wanted to press charges. He said he didn't know. What would justice even look like, I heard him say. I lost a life I don't remember, and I lived one I didn't choose. There wasn't an answer for that. The next morning I sat with him by the vending machine. The light flickered. The air smelled like dust and old soda syrup. I asked him if he ever hated me for letting go of his hand that day. He looked at me a long time before answering. "No," he said, "because I remember the way you held it. Right up until the moment someone else pulled it away." His voice caught on the last word. Then he touched the pendant and tapped it 3 times. 1, 2, 3. That was all. We sat there together until the sun got too high and the pavement warmed beneath our feet. There were still things to do. Paperwork, statements, maybe even testimony if it came to that. But for the first time, the past felt like something behind us. Not chasing, just present. Sitting still, waiting to be folded carefully into place. The motel emptied out the following day. The cleaning cart stayed parked outside for hours, no one using it. Richard had gone back to work. Erin was flying in and out of town for a research conference, and David stayed behind with me. There was a heaviness to the air I hadn't noticed before. Not grief, not fear, just weight. Like we were walking underwater now. Ross came by in the afternoon holding a sealed manila envelope and a travel mug that smelled like burnt coffee. He didn't sit down. He just handed the envelope over and said I had to push through a few layers to get this. I opened it slowly. Inside were scanned copies of sealed medical records from a private practice in Austin, an offshoot clinic tied to a shell nonprofit with no real web presence. The letterhead said Reed and Carson Developmental Services. It wasn't a pediatrician. It was a behaviorist firm. One of the pages was dated July 1997. David Miller, it read, showing signs of disrupted early bonding and over-attachment to female guardian. Nonverbal during stress response. Recommend phased exposure to controlled male authority models. The words didn't land right the first time. I read it again. Then again. Ross said softly, "They had him evaluated." I looked up at him. They tried to rewire him. He nodded once. probably more than once. There was a record of sedation dates, exposure tests, what they called emotional conditioning cycles. Everything was framed clinically as if he were a lab result rather than a boy. One page referred to a procedure involving positive association reinforcement when he used the name Miller. Another noted that he still answered to David, but not consistently. They were trying to sever the link, I said. Ross didn't speak. He didn't have to. The envelope felt heavier than it was, like it carried the weight of every moment I'd lost. David sat across the room, arms folded, watching us with a look I couldn't quite name. Not suspicion, not fear, just distance. I asked him quietly if he wanted to see the file. He shook his head no, then, after a pause, nodded yes. I handed it to him and left the room. I stood outside by the vending machines, counting the hums between clicks. 1 Mississippi 2, Mississippi 3. The door didn't open for 30 minutes. When it did, he came out and handed the file back without a word. He didn't look shaken. He looked older. That night, Erin called from the airport. She was stranded in Atlanta, but not because of weather. TSA had flagged something in her bag, an old photo album. She said they eventually let her through, but only after an agent scanned every page. I brought it because I thought maybe, I don't know, maybe it'd help. She had it shipped overnight. When it arrived, we opened it together. It wasn't one of our albums. It was David's. A soft blue cover with silver stars, like something from a school supply aisle. Inside were pictures I'd never seen. David and the Millers at a pumpkin patch, a birthday party with no candles, him wearing a Boy Scout sash but no troop number. There was a section labeled David's Thoughts. Inside were loose sheets with childish handwriting. The same phrase appeared on at least 5 pages. David belongs here now. Each line was written in a different colored pen. On one page, someone had drawn a small stick figure version of our family, me, Richard, Erin, and placed an X over each of us. I set the album down and stepped away. I didn't need to see more. Erin flipped through a few more pages, then closed it softly. "Do you think he remembers this?" she asked. I didn't answer, because I honestly didn't know. Later that night, when David came in from the balcony, he sat next to me on the bed. He said, "They told me I was lucky, that I'd been rescued, that my old life was a lie." I turned toward him. "Do you believe them?" He shook his head. "I didn't. But I didn't believe you either. I didn't believe anything." He held his hands together in his lap, fingers interlaced. "They punished me when I asked about the girl in the green coat. That was Erin. Wasn't it?" I nodded. "She wore that to the mall every winter." He looked down, then said, "They told me she was someone I'd made up. A dream. I believed them for a while, until I had another dream, and she was in that one too." The silence after that was long. Still. He added, "I started hiding things. Little things. Slips of paper, bottle caps, stones. Just to prove to myself I could remember where I put them." I asked him if he still had them. He smiled faintly. "No, but I remember what they meant." The next morning, we drove back to the house. Not for good, just to walk the yard, see if anything stirred. David asked to go alone. I stayed in the car while he wandered the grass, touched the bark of the oak tree, stood at the edge of the porch where we used to blow bubbles on Sunday afternoons. He came back holding something, a rusted keychain with a faded tag that said Unit B. He said it was in the shed inside an old lunchbox. Ross later confirmed it was from a storage unit the Millers had abandoned years ago. We tracked it down, still registered under a fake name, but the facility hadn't cleared it yet. The manager gave us 1 hour to look. What we found inside was nothing sensational. No secret files, no confession tapes. Just objects. A small blanket, a cracked snow globe, a red sneaker with the letter D printed on the heel, and in the back, a sealed envelope with no return address, no postmark. Inside was a single photo. A picture of David standing in front of a swing set holding a popsicle mouth stained blue. On the back, someone had written, "He smiled today. Remember this." We stood there for a long time. Then Ross placed the photo back in the envelope and handed it to David. "You get to decide what this means. Now," he said. David didn't respond. He just tucked it into his jacket and walked outside into the late morning light. The wind kicked up some dust and a single crow passed overhead. The sky was wide and plain and open, and for the first time in a very long time, so was the path forward. The last time I saw David before he left was in early spring when the azaleas were just starting to bloom along the edge of the porch. He'd taken to walking the property each morning, slow and deliberate, almost like he was mapping it back into his memory. He didn't say much that final week, and I didn't push him to. Some things were coming back to him in pieces, scents, sounds, the way the screen door used to creak open in the mornings. But most of it was still locked away and maybe always would be. One night we sat on the back steps, and he said almost casually, "I used to think I was born in Austin. I had a whole life there I thought was mine." I asked him if he felt like he belonged there. He shook his head and looked out at the yard. "I don't think I belonged anywhere for a long time." When he left, he didn't take much. A duffel bag, the envelope with the swing set photo, and a folded page from his old memory book, the one with the stars on the cover. He'd torn out the page that said "David belongs here now" and wrote something new in the corner I decide what belongs. He handed it to me before he got in the car. "Hold on to this, in case I forget again." He didn't mean forget the facts. He meant forget who he was without them. I told him I would. And I have. Ross retired 2 months later. He never said it outright, but I think this case took something out of him. He wasn't ready to get back. We still talk once a month. He sends postcards from places that don't usually make the news. He's better with silence than most people I know. Richard built a bench under the oak tree for no particular reason except that it felt right. Sometimes he sits there after work not to remember, but to rest. Erin teaches now. She uses part of our story in pieces when she lectures on resilience and trauma memory. She never says David's name. She doesn't have to. I still keep the red balloon photo in a drawer, the one from the day it all started. The image is grainy, the shadows long, but there's a shape near the edge I didn't notice for years. Something like a shoe, a hand, maybe just a trick of light. I've stopped trying to make it mean anything. Some stories end without solving every angle. What matters now is that David is real, that he lived, that he wasn't erased. Sometimes people ask why I stayed in the house, why we didn't move or change our name or try to forget. The answer is simpler than they expect. Because he might have come back. Because the mailbox still had our name on it. Because the porch light was still his even when he didn't know it. And now because there's something holy about a place that waited. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you even in the quiet places, maybe share it. So no one's name, no one's real name gets left behind.